Hello and welcome to Recyclist. I'm your host, Eric Provost, and this is part 2 of our talk with Matt Cale of Farnsworth Group. Let's go ahead and jump right back into the conversation. But you talked about a recent project that you were working on at Children's Hospital. I wanted to bring up the fact that you, sir, recently presented at the PDC conference just a couple weeks ago, as a matter of fact, correct?
That's right, here in Atlanta, yeah.
Yeah. You specifically talked on capital renewal forecasting, asset management, and early master planning. As the subject matter expert on that subject, what do you think would be a good summary of that presentation for some of the people out there listening to this talk right now who may be considering new buildings, new structures, new aspects of their industry or of their project or of their site?
Sure, yeah, so that project, best way to sum it up in a sentence is we basically built a financial model of a hospital. And that's everything.
Hmm.
That's mechanical and electrical systems, that's finishes, tile ceilings, that's steel structure, that's roofs, it's paved surfaces, it's all the things, because all those things are worth money over time. So basically, we gave them a huge database that said, here's what all your stuff is worth, how old it is, when it's going to expire, and what it costs to maintain
Hmm.
it. And then the other bits of it, the energy master planning we layered in was a little bit of what I discussed earlier, which is we understood that when we did that project, we were basically trying to help them set their operational expenditure budget, their OPEX, right? And say, like, this is what we think you should be spending every year to maintain the things you have at the level that you tell us you want it to be at, and then sort of set a trend there. And then, but we know that exercise is going to always end up in we're going to end up asking for more money than they're currently getting, right? So that's where the energy side of it comes in, because energy is also worth money, but you can treat it as an asset instead of a liability, and start finding ways to reduce your energy consumption and spending as a way to help fund that gap.
Would you say that would be probably one of the biggest takeaways for people that are considering doing stuff like that?
I think so, because if you're managing a big facility, you know that it's tough to get eyeballs and money where you need it as fast as you need it. And any way you can find ways to fund that stuff or show, progress toward the end goals, that's just going to help you make your case more strongly to, the C-suite or to your funders, who's ever coming in to help you get this stuff done.
Do you find that is often one of the biggest hurdles in projects is the funding?
It really is, or not that they don't have, there's not any funding, but there's some funding and it's never quite enough.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's that. On an existing building, that's always the case. Your operational budget never seems to really match up with what you think you need. If you're building a new construction building, it's just like the analogy you made earlier. Hey, we have X number of dollars that the state legislature has allocated through a
Yep.
bond buy to us, but then you start designing stuff and you go like, okay, well, maybe we didn't really need that fourth floor, right?
Yeah. I imagine from the aspect of the client, they're trying to potentially save as much money as possible. They're trying to get what they need and hopefully not much else so that they can keep it within budget. While you're saying that, well, in order to do X, Y, and Z, we also need to do A, B, and C for for energy conservation or for regulatory approval or for whatever. And that's where I guess a lot of the money clashing can come into play.
That's right. And I think there's also a little bit of an unnecessary break in the industry, because we tend to think of buildings as under construction and then hard stop, it's done. And then it goes into operations, hard stop there. When there isn't a need to do that, in my opinion. If we can talk about the entire life cycle cost of the building in dollars from day one, you'll start to realize that yes, we have this money in construction, whatever the budget is, but also, maybe it's to run this building for the next 50 years, we're going to need 5 times that amount of money, something on that scale, right?
Yeah.
And if you can just bridge the gap and say, like, we're not worried as much about hitting the construction budget, we're really more managing to that big operational expenditure in the building, then you can start to realize that making more investments early in construction to be more energy efficient is actually going to pay you back in the big long run.
Yeah, money's always going to wind up being an issue, regardless of the industry,
It
regardless of the
is.
job, regardless of anything you're doing in life, essentially.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm sure that's something that the both sides are always thinking about. I am interested. What are maybe some hurdles that might surprise people? Anybody that's considering reaching out to an engineering group like yourself to start working on a new project, what are some considerations that they may not be thinking of that you think they should be?
Yeah, so I think the hardest part is always, getting a hold of what your people in your organization are trying to accomplish. And most people can give a pretty good answer to that today. But if you're going to build a new building, especially,
Hmm.
you have to anticipate that for at least 20 years, and that's a really hard thing to think about.
You think 20 years is a good rule of thumb?
At least. I mean, and most buildings are going to be around for probably 50, right?
Okay,
So, but at least 20 years, I would say, and that's a really tough thing. If you ask me what I'm going to be doing in 20 years from now, like there's no way I have a model to predict that, right?
of
I've got some
course, yeah.
ideas of things I'd like to do, right? But for an organization with lots of people, it gets really hard. So really having your foundation underneath you as an organization and knowing what you want and need going forward is a lot harder exercise than people realize.
I can imagine. We've already talked about the regulatory landscape a little bit and trying to create plans or trying to create structures that take into account what the regulatory landscape is going to look like decades from now has got to be near impossible.
It really is. Yep.
But you said if people can at least try to plan out 20 years before they come and talk to you, you think that's at least a good way to enter the conversation?
It is, and we also are conscious of that. I'm going to help try to guide you through that conversation,
Of
right?
course.
And all those kind of things. But the more thoughtful you are about it going into it, the least surprised you're going to be when you start finding out what those how big a decision of just oh, we want to add 10% more space just in case, how big of a decision that is, and on all the ripples it makes.
So is it often the big ones like money or uh kind of the back and forth conversation? Is it ever little things that wind up halting projects or changing them or delaying things that they shouldn't be?
For sure, I was building stuff during the pandemic, so there, there was all kinds of little things that ended up being right.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But yeah, and that manifests itself. It's obviously a big thing, but it manifests itself in little things like we just couldn't get this one control board for a generator we needed, and that delayed opening a hospital. Right? There's all kinds of stuff like that you really just have to go into it and understand that all of these calculations we make are best talked about in dollars because really it's risk, right? And what's the risk that we're not going to hit this deadline or the risk that the system won't operate correctly?
I hope you were able to get that board and get the hospital taken care of at
We
least.
did. Eventually, it's a little bit of a delay, but we got it done.
But that's insane to me to think that. I mean, it makes sense, but such one board, one aspect, one piece of a building can wind up delaying the entire project like a massive domino. So I guess that's nice. Another rule of thumb for people out there is have a good understanding, have a good idea of all the electronics and all the equipment that you're going to need, and maybe if you have the opportunity, have an idea of where you're going to get all of it and make sure it's all available.
Yeah, yeah, and ordering it 2 years before you need it is also a problem, right? That's a lot of that stuff takes that long to get from a factory these days, so you need to know about it before you've ever even really designed the building.
Yeah.
So that makes it even more complicated.
And I'm sure for even small buildings, that can be a Herculean feat, especially we talk about our industry, landfills and stuff like that. The number of very intricately and very specifically made pieces, these massive $10,000, $100,000 systems. If there's an issue with that, I imagine that's going to cause a massive issue on your end as well. So, anybody out there considering talking to an engineering group, just a lot of food for thought out there. But I also, Matt, wanted to talk about. We've already talked about uh, when you spoke at the PDC conference a few weeks ago. This past summer, you were at Gasca, correct?
That's right.
And I believe you were talking about risk management in building commission.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I spend a lot of my time on is a service called commissioning, which is literally just bringing a building online and making sure it works.
Yeah,
Different than design and different than building stuff. This is just that critical spot where your construction professionals are done, and now as an owner you're ready to move in, and we come in and make sure that everything's actually doing what it's supposed to do, and if it isn't, what needs to happen. Um, and so that's kind of a big word, commissioning, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
yeah,
But that's a little bit of the point of the way we look at it is it all really just is risk management. Like you said, with the generator and missing that control board, that was a very small piece of the puzzle in terms of, it's small physically and it's really not even that expensive of a thing, but it was just almost impossible to get and had to come from halfway around the world, right?
yeah,
And so that's a very high risk thing. And so when we look at all the different things you put into a building to make it work, we start looking at things like that and saying, okay, what's the thing that could take this down? And we often call that a single point of failure analysis.
yeah,
It could take down the construction process, or in operation, if it failed, is that going to actually take the building down? And then inject that back into the front of the project and say, let's if we have to have any single points of failure, let's just be super conscious of them and put every control measure we can around them.
yeah. Having spent a good chunk of my life in the military, I can tell you we're very cognizant of any plans or any pieces of equipment we have that have a single point of failure, especially when it came to a lot of our weapons. So
Hmm.
just even saying single point of failure gives me flashbacks.
Yep, it's definitely, and we talk about it a bunch. I'm sure some of our project teams even find it repetitive at a certain point, but it's just so important, right? You can't be as thoughtful, too thoughtful about it, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you said so yourself that one circuit board delayed the opening of the hospital. It became a
Hmm.
single point of failure. You were able. Did you wind up having to fabricate it, or were you able to actually get like uh,
Yeah.
it just took a while?
We were able to get sort of a solution that worked well enough to get things up and running on a faster schedule. There was still a delay there, and
Yeah.
then while we waited for the real piece to come in, we were able to just put something in place that sort of made it work, and just keep a very close eye on it and make sure everything was all right.
Yeah. I am also curious because I imagine people from many different industries come to the Farnsworth Group to talk about, engineering structures and new buildings, stuff like that. Are there anything? Is it basically like kind of a one plan tailored to the industry, or do you have to take completely different approaches to, like, if you're doing a hospital versus like a warehouse, or a new building for a landfill versus a building for an electrical park or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly if as less critical and less complicated as a project gets, the more it lends itself to sort of using a templatized approach. Here's, if we're going to build the same warehouse 50 times in 50 different cities, we don't need to really change the
Yeah,
floor plan that much. We just need to make it fit on the site, right?
yeah.
So that's an easy version of it. But yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
warehouse has a simple, function. You can copy and paste one that you did in Wisconsin, right?
that's right. That's right. We just, we just, I mean, you can do the same in Texas as you could in California, as you could in New York. It's just, where does the sewer and the water come in and the power come in, right,
Yeah,
on that site. But yeah, something infinitely more complicated like a hospital. I mean, that's the kind of stuff where it's going to be a one-off no matter what you do. And there's certainly lots of great organizations that say, like, we're going to build an operating room this way everywhere.
yeah.
But then there's also other stuff that has to fit in the hospital to make an operating room work, right? And those things never work out as to be templatized.
But would you ever run into an issue like, because a warehouse is so simple and has such a simple function, you can kind of make it out of whatever the best material that you have available, versus like a hospital who we can't use the same material we used to make the warehouse because of electrical considerations or, electromagnetic considerations. Is that ever something that you run into?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, materials and them being available, as close to the project site as possible definitely reduces the risk of something bad happening,
Okay.
right? Yeah. So we think about that kind of stuff.
Fair enough. And I was curious. We've already talked about regulations and anything that you might like to see for the future of the industry from a regulatory standpoint, I am interested in knowing, we've already talked about the evolution as well. Is there anything out there, any emergent technologies, techniques, or anything on the horizon for this massive world of engineering that you think has the ability to impact the industry in a meaningful way?
I really think so. There's, so modern buildings, when we build them, as you would expect, just put out a ton of data. There's all kinds of stuff that comes out of the systems and their temperatures and pressures and all kinds of stuff like that. Um, but they're up until recently, maybe the last 10 years or so, I don't think there's really been a very good tool or a very widely adopted tool that helps you do stuff with that data, right? So you get all this stuff and it sort of comes at you at a million miles an hour, right? Like a full email inbox, but you don't really know what to do with it. And I think there's been a lot of strides recently in adding softwares on top of that kind of stuff. And I'm talking about a tool specifically called fault detection diagnostics,
Hmm.
um, and it just sits on top of whatever data you're producing in your building and then collects it and then organizes it into actionable items based on some training we give it, right? So instead of getting a red light on your screen that says the temperature is wrong, you'll get a message that says, air handler one, likely temperature sensor failure, go check it, right? So it turns it from just an alarm into something that somebody could stand up and go do.
Very nice, very cool. And you think that's gonna how do you think it's going to impact financing? Do you think it's going to impact uptime in the terms of how long it actually takes to finish these projects? Where do you think that's going to have the most benefit, or do you think it's just long term data that you guys can use for all future projects?
It's all of those things, but I think the biggest thing really is, it's ultimately a tool and support of the folks that have to manage and run these facilities all
Yeah,
day. And these are my clients, so maybe I'm biased a little bit, but I really do consider them, as important as first responders in any case, because they're the ones keeping these buildings safe and reliable
yeah,
for people, and just anything we can do to help support those folks and make their jobs easier and safer, I think is going to help move the needle, because those folks there are the real assets, not the equipment, right?
yeah. And a couple fun little questions to kind of end our discussion with. For we've obviously thrown a ton of information out at the listeners today, but if we could boil just a couple recommendations down, if there was anybody out there who's like, hey, I've got this building, the structure, I have a reason to reach out to Farnsworth Group to talk about an upcoming project, what would you say would be just kind of the cliffs notes of what do they need to know before they come talk to you?
Sure. I guess the big thing that we're going to try to do is always talk about any decision points you have in terms of dollars, because there's a million different engineering metrics out there, that are useful or not. But as we talked about here, everybody understands a dollar, right? And I think
Hmm.
that that's a thing to understand. So if you understand your problem in terms of dollars and not just something's not working, then we're going to come to the table and speak a common language right away and be off to the races.
Awesome. And lastly, um, I'm curious, when it comes to working these projects, I imagine there's a lot of puzzles that you need to figure out, a lot of problems that need to be solved. Is there any one industry or type of structure that maybe comes down the pipeline that you find more, I don't know, entertaining or fun? Or maybe if a hospital comes in, you're like, oh, yay, we get to work on a hospital today. Is there any specific type of structure that you enjoy working on more?
Oh, sure. I guess I really enjoy working on higher education buildings, on universities, because
Okay.
I kind of think, you have the ability to impact so many different people if that environment is conducive to learning, right? And if people can learn more efficiently in a place because we did a little bit better job, then
Hmm.
that person's going to have an impact the rest of their life, right? So whether it's higher education or even K through 12 education, that's the kind of stuff that I really try to focus in and do a good job on.
Fair enough. Good answer. I like that. But Sir, again, I think we've given the people a lot to consider right now. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me today and talking about yourself, the Farnsworth Group, and this amazingly intricate industry. How can people reach out to you if they would like to talk more?
Sure. You can find me on our company website, which is www.f-w.com, and I'm on there.
Awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again, I want to thank my amazing guest, Matt Cale, for joining me today. And if you want to reach out to him, he just gave you the website. But don't forget that Recyclist is a registered trademark of Diamond Scientific, an industry leader in gas analysis, instrumentation, and solutions. Make sure to visit them online as well at diamondsci.com. That's diamondsci.com. Or you can even set up a personalized presentation by calling 321 223 7500. Once again, my name is Eric Provost. I've been your host, and we will see you next time on Recyclist. Have a great day.